Hello, welcome to the Japan Zoomina at UC San Diego. I'm Ulrike Schaede. I'm a professor of Japanese business at UC San Diego and the director of the Japan Forum for Innovation and Technology. We are actually, that's not the slide I wanted to show. Here it is. We are at UC San Diego, which I already said. GPS stands for School of Global Policy and Strategy. This is an international relations and public policy school. One of our foci is the Pacific Rim. Among our various degrees, we have a Master's of International Affairs with a Japan specialization. If you're interested in our programmatic offerings, please visit gps.ucsd.edu. And at GPS, we have JFIT, our Japan Center. You can find out more about our activities at jfit.ucsd.edu. If you go there to that JFIT website, you can find a tab called News and Media, where you can sign up for our San Diego, Japan Newsflash. It's a bi-weekly newsletter where we're trying to have some fun and bring to you insights from Japan that you would not find in the normal daily news. And if you look closely and walk over to the left by one step, there is a Japan Zoominars tab. This is where you can sign up for future Zoominars and watch past ones. So our Zoominars are recorded and all of them are in this Japan Zoominars tab. On the recording, let me just point out, we'll have a Q&A function during our Zoominar today. If you type in a question, I may ask our guest this question, but I will refer to you only by your first name to ensure your privacy. While you're on that UCSD tab, it would be lovely if you could also wander over to the right where it says support. We are a nonprofit, we are a public university, of course, and like many places in need of support. And the way I would like to bring this to you is that if we were to do this live, which would be much more fun, of course, you would have to drive all the way to our campus, you'd have to pay for parking, and it would be just lovely if you could consider sharing those expenses with us as you sit in your comfortable Zoom chairs at home. It would help us a lot, and it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for considering. All right, so our Japan Zoominar is a weekly event. I will introduce our guest today shortly, but let me just point out to you that next week we will have Hello Kitty and the global allure of Japanese pop culture, followed by Coffee Live in Japan, and a session on the future vision of Japan after COVID. And then after that, we'll go and look at history through the transnational lens, Japan and the world. So you can sign up at these for all of these at our Zoominar tab. Alrighty, enough of this. Let me stop my share and introduce our guest today, Professor Takeo Hoshi from the University of Tokyo. Ohayo gozaimasu, Takeo. Thank you for joining us from Japan today.
Hi, good morning, Ulrike, and good morning, everybody from sunny Tokyo today. It reminds me of Southern California.
There you go. So let me introduce you briefly. A lot of our audience probably know you, but so Professor Takeo Hoshi originally hails from Tohoku, but his Japanese is very clean and easy to understand, at least to my ears. He then became a student at Todai and by way of an exchange program, ended up at MIT, where he earned his PhD under Stanley Fischer in macroeconomics and finance. And from those MIT days come some of your most famous papers, Takeo, including the HKS Series 1, which was the Hoshi, Kashyap, Shafstein studies of the main bank finance. And that really was the beginning of a long career of working on Japanese corporate finance and the macroeconomic implications of some of the financial policies. You've then subsequently written many books with Anil, Kashyap, and then also we had a HKS version 2.0, which was our study later, but I jump ahead. After you graduated from MIT, you came to UC San Diego, and we were actually colleagues there, our offices next door, just like this, for, I would say, 20 years, roughly, give or take.
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
Something like that. And that was great, and thank you for being such a great friend, co-author, colleague, conversation partner. We had a good time there talking about Japan every single day in our offices. About 8 years ago or so, you left to run and organize the Japan program at APARC at Stanford University. And then last year, I think, or 2 years ago now, you returned to the University of Tokyo, where you are now a professor, and you're very interested in helping to modernize the University of Tokyo, and also you involved in Tokyo College, which we will hear shortly. So thank you. Yes, I think it's fair to say, Takeo, that also through your work for many years, you were the Shadow Committee on Finance, and now you're an advisor to EBPM, which is the Evidence-Based Policymaking Committee. You're an award-winning economist. There are so many awards, I don't even know. I think the biggest one was probably the Best Economist in Japan award, or maybe the book award. I don't know which one you like best, but there are plenty. And so I think it's fair to say you're one of the leading economists on Japan in the world, if not the leading one. And so it's great to have you. And we want to talk about your new books and what you're doing at Todai. So thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you, Ulrike. And we, of course, taught courses together at UCSD. So it's just like back in old days. We can do conversation on the Japanese economy. Let me start by sharing my screen, sharing my PowerPoint. And these are all advertisement of my book, of course. So the first one is Japanese economy book, and this is the second edition. The first edition was done by Taka Ito alone 30 years ago, and I helped him update that. And this came out a couple of years ago now. Oh no, last year, 2020. It seems a long time ago. It was before COVID-19. So this is a textbook on the Japanese economy. And another book has just come out. This is a book I edited with Phillip Lipscy, my former colleague at Stanford University. And he moved to University of Toronto as I moved to, about the same time I moved to University of Tokyo. And this is a book on the Abe government and Abenomics reforms. The most important part of this slide has a book cover and the introduction to the book. But the most important part of this slide is one at the end. Let's see. So this one here. There's a website with 14-digit numbers, I guess. If you go there and type in this code, you can get the book with a 20% discount. Now, there's a problem if you access this website from Japan. I couldn't find a book, but I was told, so there's some problem at the Cambridge University Press, but I was told this website can be accessed from North America and Europe with no problem, and you can buy a book. So please go ahead if you live in North America or Europe. And finally, the third one is another advertisement. This talk today, or this discussion today, is co-sponsored by JFIT and Tokyo College. Tokyo College is an organization within the University of Tokyo created to share the knowledge with the society and advance the knowledge together. So shaping a shared future together that you can see here underneath the Tokyo College logo is our motto. And I'm a professor of something there as well. And the Tokyo College has its own channel on YouTube. You can see the address there, and which include the many events, including the ones I've been doing with Taka Ito and other people. So you can go to the Tokyo College, and also you could see the video of today's discussion on Tokyo College channel as well as the JFIT webinar series. So let me stop my advertisement here, and we can start talking about the Japanese economy.
Yeah, let's start with this book.
Okay.
So our colleague and friend Taka Ito, I don't know when he did it, like maybe 1995 or so, wrote it. It's basically an economics.
1991.
There you go.
Yeah.
So
30
years ago.
Yeah.
And the idea was to write a textbook, which is really an economics textbook. Like there's a chapter on international econ with, you know, all kinds of explanations of how the economy actually works, or the international economy works, with an application to Japan, right? And I guess he initially wrote it for Japanese students, but it's been great for us as well for teaching. And it basically goes from Meiji to Koizumi. This version 2.0 goes
right.
to 2012, and has and goes through the Japanese economy by sectors, right? So there's a savings, labor, international. So what are the three main sort of messages or takeaways from this book? What do you want students to grasp after they've studied the Japanese economy with this book?
So first of all, Taka did this mainly for US students. He was teaching Japanese economy at the University of Minnesota back then. And so the US student was a primary audience. As you said, this is a textbook, and this is a textbook on Japanese economy. And he tried to apply economics, or he tried to show, I think successfully, that the standard economics can be applied to explain the Japanese economy. And that's continued to be an important message in the second edition. That is that you don't really need to develop a special economics for the Japanese economy. The standard economic tools and the standard the logics in economics can be applied to the Japanese economy. So you can understand the Japanese economy by using the tools of the standard economics. Now, that doesn't mean you can explain everything perfectly. There are some puzzles. There are something the standard economics can't explain in the US or in Europe as well. But probably there are more of those for the Japanese economy, because the Japanese economy has not been studied as much as US economies or European economies in the past. So that's when we come up with a question, or when we come up with a problem issue that cannot be fully explained by the textbook economics that we have about the Japanese economy, then we can use that and reevaluate the standard economics and advance the standard economics so that it can explain not only the Western economies, but also the Japanese economy as well. So I think that's the second message of this textbook. So looking at the Japanese economy is not only interesting from the application of economic side, but it's also interesting because it sometimes forces you to reevaluate the standard economics, the highlight some shortcomings of the standard economics. So that's probably the second message we have. And related to that, I think it's important to compare Japanese economy to, mostly we compare that to the US economy. By comparing these two and looking at the differences, we can understand how the economy in general works better. So that's probably the third message we have.
Can you give us an example of where knowing what happened or did not happen in Japan might help us better understand the US?
For example, I think there was a whole discussion on keiretsu or the corporate relations in Japan, which I worked on, which you worked on as well. And that highlighted the importance of some intermediate organization between the market and the tight organization, right? So that came out of, I think, mostly from Japan. And that was a practice observed mostly in Japan. The corporations try to solve the problems through long-term relations. And I think that led to the development of the theory of intermediate organization. And Japan is not only Japan. You see these in all over the world. But I think Japan, the Japanese economy played an important role in advancing our understanding of the intermediate organization.
So I want to go to the second book next, but this one fits.
Yeah.
My next question fits into the current conversation. So
Okay.
after the bubble burst, and
Yes.
so there was a couple of years in 1993, 94, where we were kind of going, what are we going to do? What's happening? And then Japan really kind of fell apart in a way, right? So the banking crisis was getting worse. And there were a number of people in the United States, including Ben Bernanke and Paul Krugman, who chastised Japanese policymakers for their insufficient support of the economy of what they saw. And some 10, 15 years later, both of them and several others in the same boat apologized that they had prematurely judged and misjudged the difficulty that Japan found itself in. And part of their apology was triggered by the fact that the US is now maybe in a similar dire straits. Is there something in this version 2.0 of this book? Do you go into this issue about what to do with ZERP and the zero interest rates and the whole monetary policy lessons that we've learned from
whole
post-bubble?
non-traditional monetary policy or unconventional monetary policy? We have a discussion of that in chapter 6. And also we have one chapter, the chapter 14, which is dedicated to understanding of the lost 2 decades, or so-called lost 2 decades. So there we go into the question of if there was a policy mistakes, if there was something Japan could have done better, and so on. Going back to the collapse of the bubble you talked about, in early 1990s and all the way to 2020, or 2012, what Japan could have done better. And certainly it's true that all of us underestimated Japan's problem. And or Japan's problems, or the problem for the all advanced economies now, with shortage of demand and lack of productivity growth and aging of the population and so on. And it's certainly true that we underestimated the situation that Japan was in, but also it's true that Japan could have done better. And I think many people, including Ben Bernanke and Paul Krugman, advocated something Japan, the Japanese government or Bank of Japan wasn't doing back then and could have done more or could have done better.
All right, so this book ends in 2012, and then the next book basically picks up where this ends, right?
It's actually 2019.
Oh, is that right? I saw it.
Yes, yeah. The lost 2 decades. So our claim is the lost 2 decades ended in 2012 or 2013. So Abenomics ended the long-term stagnation, or the lost 2 decades. So Abenomics period wasn't lost. So right. We have a positive assessment of Abenomics, which carries over to my book with Phillip Lipscy.
Let's just stay for the last decade. So I of course, don't think that those decades were necessarily lost. Okay. I mean, there were maybe I don't know actually what lost means. I mean, I think there's a lost generation. That's true, right? So the young Japanese that graduated into this recession never really got into this very lockstep, by age promotion, long-term employment system of Japan, and that's a real issue. But for the large companies, I think that what happened during this period was they went on a diet. These very highly diversified conglomerates started becoming more focused. And within the existing Japanese regulatory system, that wasn't so easy because they couldn't lay people off, or if they could, then they still had to. So it was a very long-term thing. And under Koizumi, there were some legal reforms that made it a little easier to spin out, spin off, carve out. And the real fruits of that we then saw with sort of Choose and Focus version 2.0, which only happened under Abenomics, right? And but that meant that the years under Koizumi were actually not lost. They were the sort of the preparation of getting ready, get people's mindset around the issues of what would have to happen next. And in typical Japanese fashion, this is very slowly and carefully done, but it wasn't lost, because rebuilding, not losing a home, it's making a better home. Right?
So I think it really depends on how we interpret the lost, right, as you said. And so I think the Japanese economy wasn't lost in the sense that Japan got poorer, and Japanese corporations, their profitability declined. But those 20 decades were lost in a sense. Japan could have done better. So that's the term of the word I use. There was a lost opportunity which we can't observe. And also it depends on, I think, the apparent difference between us come from the different things we are looking at. I look at macroeconomy mostly. You look at individual corporations. And so if you look at the individual corporations, you can certainly see many corporations which tried and gradually changed and became profitable again, right? We can, you can throw out some names if you want, but most recently Hitachi came to my mind, and but every Hitachi there was maybe I shouldn't say this, but the Toshiba and some others as well. So there are some companies which struggled through the troubles and came back stronger. But on balance, if you look at the macroeconomy, I've been looking at the different types of companies that you have been looking at, what I call zombies. Which should go out of business, but protected and stay in the business without being restructured and so on. On balance, there were more of those zombies in Japan than what you call the focused growing companies. So
I want to get
yeah.
back to the zombies later. Let's go to the second book first.
Okay.
So the Abenomics book is an edited volume.
So I can show the second book here.
Yes, and so let me ask that same question again. So if I were to go to the website and buy it, what do you want me to learn from that book? Or what would you hope that I take away from the book?
So this is. This is again a text, or it's not a textbook, but it covers a wide range of the issues. Now, not only the economy, but we talk about politics as well. So you have, or you are an expert on the Japanese economy. So you Ulrike, or you, Professor Schaede, you may not learn very much from this book, but for the general audience, or the people who are interested in the Japanese economy or Japanese political economy, this is a good introduction or the good book to understand how the researchers on the political economy think about the Abenomics, Abenomics and the Abe administration. And I think Abe administration was an important thing when you look at the Japanese political economy in terms of the politics. Or it was the longest lasting cabinet, right? The longest cabinet, longest lasting administration, maintained the popularity for a long time, and using that popularity, the government implemented many economic reforms, and also implementing the economic reforms, at least talking about the economic reforms for economic growth, was an important important strategy to maintain the popularity. So by going through this book, I think the readers can understand, get the whole picture of the Abenomics and what it did. And fortunately for us, Abe administration ended before this book came out. So we have the whole history of Abe administration.
It basically came out the day that Abe resigned or something like that. It was a good,
something like that.
Good timing, yeah. So, so Abe, one of the things that Abenomics could not fix is the area that you have spent a lot of time looking at, which is the role of finance for small firms and also the zombies. And you mentioned the zombies earlier, so let's go talk about the zombies.
Okay.
Are they still there? Did Abenomics finally put an end to that story, or maybe give us some background of what in your view, what zombies are and how they have developed recently?
Right. So I think it's important to talk about the clear definition of zombies. As the word zombies becomes more popular, I think the word zombies are sometimes, or most of the times, misunderstood. So I think there are two parts to the zombies. The one is that the company is not profitable. The company would go out of business under a competitive market environment. And the second, more important thing is, nonetheless, the company continues to exist without any effort to restructure or to regain the profitability or to regain the productivity. And the companies can do that because they are protected by, for example, the banks in terms of 1990s in Japan, which we talked about, or maybe the government these days. In many countries, the government has been helping the troubled companies during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is the right thing to do. There's a whole big macroeconomic shock, but if they continue to help unviable firms, even after the pandemic is over, the economy can have a problem of the zombie firms. So I think it's important to understand that zombie firms, there are two things to the zombie firms. Not only they are not profitable or productive, but they don't restructure, they don't try to regain the profitability.
So I actually think that this whole zombie, let me just throw this out and see what you think, right?
Please.
I actually think that this whole zombie policy is brilliant.
Okay.
And so in my view, and I'll try to be as concise and succinct as I can be here, but let's talk about small firms, right? And so there's a variety of government loan programs and programs where small companies can go to a regional bank and they can get a loan, and everybody understands, even though nobody says it, everybody understands that these loans will not be repaid. They're fundamentally welfare. And the advantage of doing it, so rather than shutting down the farm and having the owner go to the welfare office where they stand in line and they have to, it's shameful and all that sort of thing. So rather than doing it our way, let me say, the Japanese approach is to say, well, let's keep everybody's dignity intact here. We keep this dry cleaner or tatami maker or whatever company, we keep them alive. We give them a loan, modernization loan, and we know that they will default on this loan, but still every day they have to get up in the morning and they have to open the store and they have to engage in some activity, even though very few people nowadays buy these tatami or need this dry cleaner. So I think, and actually, if we took those loan recipients out of our productivity estimates of how great the economy is doing, I think we would find that Japan is actually much more productive. It's just that the denominator has all of these little firms in it that drag, you would say it drags the economy down. I would say it keeps society stable.
So that's exactly what the Japanese government has been doing. Not only for the small and the medium enterprises, and I think traditionally the more for the large companies, that they protected the large companies so that they can protect employment. So this is what the Japanese government have been doing in whenever a big shock hit the economy. It was true back in early 1990s. When the bubble collapsed. That was true in the global financial crisis, which hits the Japanese economy. And that's around the time when the Japanese government started to protect the small and medium enterprises by lending through the banks more so than before. And now the Japanese government is doing that again. So they're really protecting the companies in order to protect employment. And there are two costs to that. The one is the cost that you mentioned, although you didn't talk about the size, right? So the cost is keeping these companies which are not contributing to the productivity or the profitability or the economy. And the second, which is a more important part of the cost, or the more important part of the zombie problems, is so the zombie problem is not only the zombies are not productive. The more important part to the zombie problem, which was a point of my original paper with Neil and Ricardo, was that there's a spillover effect. By staying in the market and competing with otherwise healthy farms, you reduce the profitability of those healthy farms and discourage the new entrants who can be more productive, who are more productive than the existing companies and can use the workers who are employed by those zombie farms better. So that's the second more important part of the problem of the zombies. So I think you are right that this is a government policy. The government, when the government protects the unprofitable or the troubled companies, what they have in mind is the protection of employment. So Japan has been doing this policy of protecting the corporations in order to protect employment. And I think the opportunity cost of doing that has been quite high because there's a better alternative. A better alternative is for the government to directly help these employees, the workers who would lose a job if those companies go under. And that way you don't have to distort the business. You don't have to go through the intermediary of the company's management in order to subsidize or help the workers.
Well, I think we know from Europe that high levels of unemployment are not helpful for society, right?
That's true.
even if you have unemployment handouts and these people are not starving and it's okay and the government helps them,
Right.
in terms of a social fabric, it's not a good thing.
Right.
And there's a lot of ways.
So yeah, there's a lot of ways to try to move the workers from unprofitable sector to another one, or unprofitable companies to another one. And there have been, I think there have been increasing number of studies of the labor retraining program in Japan, and there have been one study done by Hiromi Hara recently. And those papers, those researchers suggest some of these re-education program, at least in Japan, work quite well in moving workers or giving more skills to the workers. And this may be something to do with education level of the typical Japanese workers and so on. But I think there are some ways to help the workers who lose the job because of the big macroeconomic shock, a big reallocation shock, by helping them directly without creating too much unemployment.
So I should say to the audience, if you have a question, feel free to type it into the Q&A and I will try to weave it into our conversation. So we have 2 questions on this point.
Okay.
Robbie wants to know whether you agree with my idea that the productivity growth numbers would be very different for Japan if we had a way to adjust for the welfare zombies, so to say, right? So what do the zombies do to productivity growth? And then Hiroki would like us to address whether that's an SME story or whether it's is it a mini zombie story or is it a large firm story? And not all SMEs in Japan, of course, just as, so talk a little bit more about the farm and what this actually means on the ground. We're not only talking about tatami makers, right? We're talking also they're profitable SMEs and they're non-profitable large firms.
Yes, so there are many different firms. So the first point on the productivity number, if you exclude some of those firms, of course the productivity number changes, but I don't think that changes the reality. I mean so I don't know what to make of that.
Well, what about productivity growth? And I would say we should stop worrying about that. Okay. But yeah.
Well, productivity growth, I think it's the same thing. The productivity growth, the productivity level, those will, well, both of those will change. The second question or the second point is probably more important. We are looking at the different types of farms. So protecting all the zombies will be, or all the suspected zombies will be a mistake, but also killing all the suspected zombies will be a problem as well. We need to get into the individual situation much more deeper to understand why the productivity growth is lower for these particular companies. And if there is a possibility and willingness to restructure the business so that they can regain the productivity. And this is, close to the type of work you do and the type of work I do. But I think it's important to look at the individual cases to judge whether it's important to continue supporting this company, which are not doing well currently, or the company should decide to go out of business.
So we have a number of queries here, and I'm very curious also to hear what the Japanese economy is like today. So you've returned to Japan, now you have your hand on the pulse. How is COVID affecting the Japanese economy, and are the Japanese policies different from US policies in terms of economic support for various sectors? I mean, are the bankruptcies up? What's going on with the COVID situation?
So the COVID situation, so if you look at the number of people who are infected or the number of people who are dying, the COVID situation in Japan so far has been milder compared with the US. You know, we are now in the fourth wave, and I don't know what happens in the fourth wave. But so far, in terms of the health, Japan has been doing quite well. Economy suffered as badly as the US and many other economies. But one important, but on the other hand, the stock market has been doing very well in Japan. So in Japan and elsewhere too. So I think we can say at least the people expecting the economy to recover quite well, at least for many corporations.
But it must have affected certain parts of the population. I mean, there must have been some that suffer in Japan. It's not, you know, the restaurants are not open, the stores are not open. So is there a way to measure this already, or, you know, what do we know?
So there are ways to measure this, of course. And so for example, we can look at the employment figure. So let me look at some slides, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
There are some pictures I prepared just in case. So this was the last picture. So there was. So if you look at the employment situation, the Japanese situation or the employment situation has been stable. Okay. So the right-hand side is probably the easier to look at. It's a non-farm active employment. So it's employment minus furloughed workers. There were lots of furloughs back in April last year under the state of emergency, but it recovered. And there was again a small dip in January when there was another state of emergency. But overall, even if you control for the furlough, if you take into account the furlough, the employment has been stable. And even if you take into account the furloughed workers, it came back to the normal. But as Ulrike, as you pointed out, there were some workers who suffered more than the others, and some industries which suffered more than the others. But so there's again, if you look at the individual firms or the micro situation, the situations are different. But overall economy, I think Japan fared very well in terms of employment. And also, this is a picture which shows some differences. Also, another thing I've been focusing on or being interested in is what's been happening for the number of bankruptcies, the corporate failures. And of course, I look at this from the point of view of if there are some firms which the government is helping too much. And the one thing we note is during the COVID-19, the 2020 and 2021, the number of bankruptcies have been down. This is a number from Tokyo Shoko Research the database or Tokyo Shoko Research data. But the number of bankruptcies have been down during this period, which suggests because some of these firms hit hard, we may have to expect the larger failures when these government help runs out, and or if the government help continues too long, there may be a problem of zombie companies again. So that's a situation from my point of view of the Japanese economy.
Let me channel a question from Hugh Patrick, the professor at Columbia, who has been a mentor to both of us and a shaper of our careers in more ways than we can count.
Yeah, thank you, Hugh, for the question.
Yes, and Hugh's question is, what worries you most about Japan today? And I would add to that, and where do you see some hope and strength?
Okay, so what worries me I'm not sure if it's most, but what worries me is again the resurgence of the zombie problems, and I worry about that. But on the other hand, I'm quite hopeful about the future of the Japanese business and the Japanese economy because the many corporations and the government too, I think, uh, has at least started to take this trouble seriously. And many corporations and the government itself too started talking about the importance of the digital transformation, the corporate transformation, which many Japanese corporations and especially the Japanese government needed a long time ago, maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But now there's a chance it may be happening. So I'm hopeful in the sense I was hopeful right after the earthquake. Ulrike, you and I did a panel discussion right after the Tohoku earthquake back in 10 years ago, and I think we were both hopeful that some drastic change may happen in Japan finally. And I'm hopeful in that sense as well. This was a big shock, certainly, and that revealed some problems of the Japanese economy or Japanese political economy.
So
there's a chance to fix that.
So one of the things we were hopeful about in those days, or at least I was that that the shock would make people start asking questions about lifestyle and work-life balance and the negative parts of lifetime employment, which is this entrapment and a lot of disillusionment about among people that are stuck in companies and the DX. So Japan has a word for the digital transformation, right? The DX is now bringing this new necessity of retraining. And of course, we already talked about retraining just now with the zombies, right? So if we could close down some companies that have no viable business models any longer, and we can retrain somehow, this things might be there might be a lubrication of the system that could be helpful. And then of course the DX is bringing another need to retrain, which is taking the farmer off the field and into a vertical farm that is run by AI algorithms, or that is a different skill set completely. The universities play an important role in this, and now that also that the shukatsu is out and we can companies hire people around the year, or however that will look like, the universities are becoming even more important, right? And when people start job changing, companies will stop training their people. What is the University of Tokyo doing around that, and what's the Tokyo College all about? Is this related to finding some new ways of training young Japanese?
Yes to all of those. And the University of Tokyo started this, of course, before the COVID-19, of encouraging for example, encouraging the students to have a startup culture. Working for a large corporation is not the only thing you can do. You can start your own business if you have a good idea and funding, that type of thing. And also the Tokyo College is an attempt to engage society and talk with the society to come up with a solution to the important problems. So that's another part. The University of Tokyo started more on recurrent education, taking the students from not only the 19 years old, but the older students as well. So we be doing that, and I think the importance of doing those trying those is more important now because of the COVID-19 and the transformation. And of course, university itself has to transform, as it is a case for many universities in the US. We had to move online and come up with with a solution or improve the delivery of the lectures through online rather than the face-to-face type of things.
But aren't we talking about something much more deep-seated? And what I mean is that in the old lifetime employment, so the lifetime employment had a lot of benefits. It's there's a lot of costs, right? It's expensive, it's rigid, it's, and as it got ossified, it became a problem. But lifetime employment per se is actually something that everybody likes, including companies. Turnover is low. Companies can invest in training. As they do so, they reap the benefits. So companies can send students abroad for study. They can send them to hands-on classes, on-the-job training, and all kinds of very positive things. As job changing increases, which it is rapidly right now, the equation for the company, for the employer changes, because investing in the employees makes no sense if the employee then takes the knowledge and runs. So as that happens, the universities will have to take over and actually train job skills like MBA programs, and and train university students how to use Excel and how to make PowerPoint presentations, and by the way, also content and logic and all kinds of hands-on skills. And that is not what Japanese universities have historically done, I think. Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair to say, that because the Japanese companies did those.
Right.
But with the more movement of the jobs, the movement of the people, the individual benefit of the training to the company becomes much lower than the social benefit, right? So there's an externality. So I think it makes sense for the universities or the government to take over that role, partially to take over that role of education or training from the corporations and do that for the society. So it's I think it's a natural trend, and I think the university should change to adapt.
So we had I had Jesper Koll here as a guest, and early this year, and he said he would love to be reborn a 23-year-old Japanese. Because if you are young and smart and you study the right subjects, there's a labor shortage in Japan, you're king. You can do what, I mean, everything is possible right now because of this labor shortage and this DX and the, Rick asks whether you agree with that, and he's more worried whether it is still the case that young Japanese are too complacent, or how do they see the future? Are they as excited as Jesper is about everything that can be done in Japan, or is there a lot of sort of doubt where the economy is headed?
I've been back in Japan for 2 years now, or a year and a half, and I've been meeting some young people in college. And my sense is that they share Jesper's point. They are talented, and they see they have a lots of opportunities, and they are energetic. And I've been impressed with my students. And in addition to that, I would say, being 63 years old may be good too. I'm getting there soon, but I was talking with Mr. Senmoto that you know, and when he started, I think E-Mobile, right?
That's right.
He was 63 years old and created that business. So it's not too late for us.
Yeah, so it's not too late. Yeah, so you can become an entrepreneur next. That would be quite something.
Yes. So that's a hopeful side of Japan, the Japanese economy.
So let's go back to the macroeconomy, because that's there's still some questions out about what you see, and what's the GNP trajectory? Is COVID gonna mess up Abenomics? And I also would like to know what you actually think the the biggest impact of Abenomics was on the economy, and is COVID wiping this out, or was that so deep seated that even a pandemic will not wipe out the good effects of Abenomics on the Japanese economy?
So Abenomics, there was basically three things for Abenomics, right? The one is a monetary policy to pull the Japanese economy out of deflation. And the second is a fiscal policy, the fiscal stimulus, and fiscal consolidation in the long run at the same time. And the structural economic reforms, which includes everything else. I think Abenomics was quite successful in the monetary policy, the pulling the Japanese economy out of deflation. It didn't achieve the 2% inflation target, but nonetheless, Japan is out of deflation now. And I think there the COVID-19 or the pandemic would help in terms of inflation because it was a big supply shock, which increased the cost of doing business, or the cost of providing, for example, the shopping experience without worry of being infected. Okay. And probably more importantly, when the pandemic is over, or when the fourth wave is over and before the fifth wave starts, or when people got vaccinated, there will be more demand. So I think there will be inflation. So in that sense, I think the pandemic will be helpful. I'm not sure if you remember, I hope you don't remember, but I said the same thing after the earthquake 10 years ago. Inflation is coming in. I was totally wrong. So if this happened, remember that I said the pandemic is good for inflation. If it doesn't happen, forget it. For economic reforms, Abenomics succeeded in some reforms and not in others. And for the places they have succeeded, for example, increasing the women's employment and so on, I think the pandemic so far has not been big enough to change the trend. So there have been more loss of jobs for women in the pandemic. But still, compared with the 2012, more women are employed, and they're in a more important position. And I think that reform sticks.
So the final question I have is, so you've been studying the Japanese economy for a long time now. And so what would you advise if I'm a student of the Japanese economy or an analyst and I want to know how to assess it properly? What are the most important data, figures, ratios, aspects that you would advise that we look at to understand what is going on in the Japanese economy?
I don't think there's any one figure that you can look at. You should be ready to look at any data that may be helpful, and there are lots of data.
So let me give you one where I think I'm particularly interested in, or two.
Yeah.
One is the Japan's export as a contribution to GDP, or in fact, the role of exports for the economy. And the other is the role of Japan's global production network, which would be measured more in terms of production outside of Japan and how that is growing. You did a study for NERA where you found that even though exports are actually not that big for the Japanese economy, they are where the growth is, or the non-growth for that matter, right? And so I always thought that was probably one of the more important things that I would look at. And exports, by the way, are up. So that number that you found for the NERA, when you did the NERA report, it was at 12%, but it's now back at 20%, right?
20% of the whole economy. Yeah. Probably. Yes. But the point we made was Japan didn't depend on the export in terms of the level, but it did depend on the export too much on economic growth. In other words, Japan's domestic growth was too small. So in order to have a stable growth for the large economy like Japan, you really need to have a domestic economy, the domestic economy growth. So from that point of view, this experience of pandemic may be good in making people understand the importance of the domestic economy. You can't rely on export too much.
Well, with the shrinking market, I think what actually that's the second part of my earlier question, right? The global production networks becoming more and more important, right? So Japanese life insurers are buying foreign life insurers because that's where the young people are, and the beer companies are going to other continents because that's where the thirsty people are. And so as the shrinking society becomes a true phenomenon in Japan, I think we will see much more of a Japanese corporate presence around the globe, because that's where the people are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
It would have to be that way. So unfortunately, time is up. We are actually over. So let me thank you on that note. And so if there's really not one number that you want us to look at, if we want to understand what's going on in Japan, then I'll let you, we can make that a guessing game, I guess. So thank you, Takeo, for joining us.
Yeah, we should all try to find the new data, which are more informative than the old ones we have been looking at.
Maybe we'll make that the contest. I will have your co-author Taka Ito as a guest here in a few months, and then let's see, maybe he has some silver bullet analysis points for us. So thank you, audience, for joining us. Thank you, Takeo, for the nice conversation, and we will see everybody back next week. Until then, please stay well and healthy, and take good care. And with that, goodbye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.